Hi, I'm Bill Bradley. Join me for a recent excerpt of American Voices. But first, here on American Voices, we're curious about people's stories and the memories they hold close to their heart. So we asked film producer Carolyn Pfeiffer, is there a snack or meal that reminds you of your childhood? Here's what she told us.
Hi, my name is Carolyn Pfeiffer, and the food that reminds me of my childhood is Brunswick Stew. Brunswick Stew is a meat-heavy Southern dish. It's a very Southern stew, and I would say more for winter than for summer. And it has small game, rabbits, squirrels, chicken or pork, lima beans, corn, tomatoes, and sometimes barbecue sauce. I mean, those are the sort of traditional things. There's some controversy about whether this stew emanates from Brunswick County, Virginia, or another county where there's a Brunswick in Georgia. There's a competition as to where this stew originally came from. I, however, grew up in North Carolina, just across the state line from Virginia, but it was very, very popular where I grew up and where I was a child. My favorite memory of Brunswick Stew was that I had a great uncle who had been in the cavalry. He was I think, the last of the cavalry officers, and that was disbanded in the early 40s, I think. And he was very eccentric, and he only ever lived in tents, never married, always lived in tents, and he had an open kitchen tent, and he used to cook Brunswick Stew. And so as a child, it was just a great adventure to go to my Uncle Goat. His name was Goat, Goat, was his nickname, and watch him put together this stew, which would cook for days. And in the South, it was very popular. It would be canned and it would be served pretty much anywhere. You could get it in many restaurants. You'd have it at people's homes. It was a full meal, just this bowl of stew. It was a big, heavy dish of meat and vegetables. My Uncle Goat, whose real name was Frank Cardwell, he had a plot of land that was actually in town, on the edge of town, but in a residential section. And there were houses around him, but then he had his plot that was tents. So he had a couple of bedroom tents. On rare occasions, I was allowed to stay the night. And then his kitchen tent was, of course, an open tent. It didn't have sides because that would have been maybe dangerous. My Uncle Goat was a very quiet man. It was really hard to get much information out of him. I was, of course, fascinated by the fact that even though I was maybe 9 or 10 when I remember first, my memories go back to about that age, because that was about the age I got my own horse, and I would ride with my Uncle Goat after school. Either my friend Pat or my Uncle Goat, we would go out into the countryside and ride every day. And so he was a real horseman, very, very knowledgeable about horsemen. In fact, my first saddle was, I think, his cavalry saddle. I think visiting his kitchen started about the time that I was connecting was riding with him more regularly. He was pleasant, and I couldn't say he was fun because he was a very, very, very reserved gentleman. I don't know the history that came before. I was too young for people to tell me anything, so I don't really know what his backstory was, other than he came back from the cavalry and put together this compound where he lived. It was on a plot of family land. And he spent his life working with my grandfather, who was a horse and mule trader. So when I was a child during the summer, living in this small town, we had amazing freedom. It was sort of crime-free. In the summertime, if I could get out of the door before my mother plaited my braids, which I always tried to do, the only rules were you have to be home at noon for lunch, and you have to be home by 5:30 for supper at 6. Those were the rules. And I had my horse, and so there was sort of great freedom. I had a couple of friends who had horses too, but the Brunswick Stew, because it's so Southern, I think it's only really known in a couple of states, and it's connected to my eccentric great uncle Goat, my grandfather's brother. I loved my Uncle Goat. He was so eccentric, and he always rode horses, and he was one of the first people to teach me to ride. And so I connect all those things together for my fond memories of my childhood. I'm happy to say my happy childhood.
That was film producer and author Carolyn Pfeiffer. Her recent book is called Chasing the Panther, Adventures and Misadventures of a Cinematic Life. I love hearing from you. Recently, listener George Marino wrote in about our segment about author Amor Tolls. He says, "One of my favorite authors. Thanks for sharing the conversation. George, glad you enjoyed it, and thanks for writing in. Be sure to let us know your thoughts and comments on anything you've heard today. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram and write me." Thank you for listening to American Voices here on my YouTube channel. For more interviews celebrating the goodness and creativity of the American people, click the subscribe button below.